What it will do, and it certainly did for us, was helped us sharpen our pencil a bit more on how do we prepare for different scenarios and shocks in ways that, we can make our solutions as resilient as possible for clients. And in the end, that's why people buy insurance, for protection. So I think in the end, we're all going to be better for having had to strengthen things as a result. Hi, this is Jasmine Gurley, President and CEO of Allianz Life, and this is the future of insurance.
Jasmine, it's great to get to sit down with you. And you're one of the rarities that I've actually gotten to meet in person, which I think for all of us is such a rare thing these days, but fantastic to get some time with you and hear a little bit more about what's going on at Allianz.
Well, thanks for having me here, Brian.
So I gave away some of your backstory, the company you work at, but tell us a little bit more about you and what you do. And then I'd love to understand your business as well.
Sure. So as I mentioned, I'm the president and CEO of Allianz Life. We are the North American headquarters of our parent company, Allianz SE. They're based in Munich, Germany, and they have roughly 80 or so insurance companies operating across P&C, life, health, and asset management around the world. So this is a great opportunity to kind of lead and drive and shape the future of retirement here in the US. That's what we focus on at Allianz Life. And we work closely with our other global partners to bring best practices and solutions from across that group of families to our customers. I've held a lot of different roles during my time at Allianz. I've led things from product to operations, other parts of the organization, and was the chief growth officer for a few years before coming into this position. So that gave me a really good opportunity to kind of better study and understand some of the trends that are shaping our business and where things are headed, and hear directly from customers and distribution partners about what's shaping and changing their expectations for insurance.
Yeah, I imagine the breadth of understanding of the different pieces of the business and the functions and the roles was really valuable, given how much change the industry was thrust into starting in 2020 in particular. Not that that stopped at all.
Yeah, that's right. I think, it's always helpful to have the ability to look at situations through multiple different lenses, whether it be different segments of customers, different types of distribution partners, or even different aspects of the customer value chain. So that was one of the great benefits of having worked in a lot of different roles. And I think you're right. Lots of things have changed pretty substantially over the last couple of years, but insurance is also a long-term business. So understanding the context for how things came to be is really important in terms of how to think about how to do things differently going forward.
Jasmine, you mentioned distribution. And for those who don't know, when Allianz thinks of distribution, what does that mean in the US? Is it, we've had people on who are more on the group benefit side, so it's about larger partnerships. We've had people who are more individual focused. What is distribution as a question for Allianz?
Yeah, so at Allianz in the US, we work with third-party independent distribution partners. So that includes independent marketing organizations, broker-dealers, RIAs, and kind of any distribution entity in between. We primarily are in the retail business. So the advisors that are affiliated with those firms are also appointed with Allianz and then distributing our products as well as products of other companies. And then we recently entered the employer market with an annuity that sits alongside a managed account and can be offered as part of a 401k. That's a new market for us, and that's one where we'll be building out our distribution presence. But that's exciting for us because we believe there's a lot of growth in that segment to really help reach customers that typically aren't reached through our traditional advice channels.
Yeah.
And then last but not least, we also have some buffer ETF solutions, which are exchange traded. And so those are available through kind of really any opportunity where people could be purchasing asset management products.
So I take the move into some of the employer space products, but as you think about the core of the business and the history of the business, that's a space that the pandemic really hit. And not to say to anyone who works in the employer distributed space, I'm sure you've had lots of struggles there too, and lots has changed. But when you think about financial advisors, those one-to-one relationships that were so in person and personal for so many years, and even as other things were moving digital, it really did stay such a like a human to human kind of thing, and then it couldn't be. Um, you must have seen great shocks to the way that people work, and how do you navigate that? And not that the pandemic has been a good thing, but are there pros that have come out of that? Has it moved the industry forward? I'm really curious in your take of all this.
Yeah. Well, of course, I think, the pandemic accelerated something that was already in the works in a lesser form. But you're right, there really has not been a ton of change in terms of how financial advice has been delivered. Historically, it has been a person-to-person advice delivery. Most of that's contact that's happened in person, with, in most cases, relationships built over many, many years with financial advisors and their clients. Of course, that's really good because it helps, advisors really know and understand their client situation and tailor their advice to meet their needs. So that the key and what was the challenge that we were facing along with, our peer companies, was how do we not lose that kind of proximity to the customer, which is so important to giving good advice, but find different ways to enable and deliver some of the content and the content exchange that was needed to make that work in the pandemic. Certainly there were some cases where I think we were seeing, particularly on the broker dealer side of the business, people moving to more digital planning processes. But even so, what was still delivered to the client tended to be a face-to-face interaction. What the pandemic really forced to happen more quickly was two-way use of digital tools to help clients really understand and model different financial scenarios and different financial outcomes. And for that to be a complement to the advice, which, in many cases then had to get delivered via Zoom or on the phone or something else. In the end, of course, you would never wish for a pandemic, but I think it did really force acceleration of some trends that were a bit overdue in the life annuity space, and ultimately leads for better solutioning for clients, which is what we all want to see.
I'm curious if there are any specific tools that, I think there's sort of two classes, just things that were out that people weren't using that suddenly they did. And maybe you saw like we had them there and then adoption kicked in, and others where maybe it was a new solution that, but for the situation, maybe wouldn't have been envisioned or envisioned yet. Are there things that Allianz has done that fit into both of those categories or that you've seen success in?
Yeah, so I'll give you a few examples. So in the first, in terms of things that maybe had been started or dabbled in a little bit, but got accelerated, I would highlight the financial planning platforms and tools that are becoming more and more prevalent, such as eMoney or Money Guide Pro. Those platforms existed prior to the pandemic, but I would say insurance, for the most part, wasn't really integrated into the planning process, either through technology or systematically. It was often handled kind of outside with a referral, perhaps to a specialist or an advisor. And then as customers and advisors were looking at their plan, it would be, okay, here's your plan. And then, oh, by the way, here's your insurance. Insurance companies like Allianz had to very quickly figure out how could we get our products embedded and integrated into these tools so that they could really see insurance as part of their overall financial planning picture. And one of the reasons that's so great is if advisors can figure out how to use insurance to define certain outcomes within a plan, it actually gives them much more latitude to optimize the upside on the other parts of the plan. So that's really a positive thing that we've seen happen. And we really invested a lot to get our products integrated into those tools and to support advisors in learning how to use them effectively, and making sure that they're sharing them well with their clients. In terms of completely new things that came out of the pandemic, or I'd say primarily new, we really saw a huge shift towards the use of electronic PHI, or personal health information or health data. That's really important for underwriting. So doctors' offices, for example, at the beginning of the pandemic, just were completely consumed with pandemic activities, not able to be very responsive to insurance companies who are asking for data. But because so much of that data is available electronically, finding ways that we could utilize it better within our systems, along with customer consent, significantly expedited the process and helped us deliver insurance to people more quickly, particularly during a time when more and more people were looking for life insurance protection, with the pandemic kind of right in everyone's line of sight.
Did you I appreciate on the technology side. Did you see any pressure on the product side? You know, the old adage like life insurance is sold, not bought, and so it's complex, and you need to sit down with someone. Did that force any rethinking on the product side, or actually these tools were able to bridge that gap despite people's initial hesitation around them?
Yeah, so I would say we certainly had to make some modifications, but generally speaking, what the pandemic did for insurance was help kind of reinforce for people why insurance was so important. I
Yeah.
think with, everyone knows someone who unfortunately lost a family member or a friend during the early days of COVID. Many people were even hit much harder than that. I mean, that really put mortality in the spotlight for people, and I think actually caused a lot of people to seek insurance solutions, at least in terms of life insurance.
Yeah.
On the annuity side, what we saw was that people were really seeking some sort of protection from volatility in the markets.
Hmm.
And so again, the solutions were attractive. Now we modified some features. We made some enhancements to the products that helped them be even more relevant, if you will, in light of the pandemic situation. But I think actually our challenge now as we come out of the pandemic and are entering new economic conditions is how we innovate for future conditions, which, still are really quite uncertain.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I always said every risk register I ever saw at any carrier I worked at or consulted at, there was always like global pandemic or contagion, and no one really paid attention. It was just sort of like there. And I think to your point, this was that wake up call for the industry as well, that like we can't just put it on a risk register and think that that's good enough. We actually do need to think through what does that mean so that we're not caught off guard, and could be that we're missing an opportunity or suddenly exposed to things that no one had ever fathomed before, and then we have to deal with
Yeah,
it.
that's right. I actually read something that said that in 2019, when the large consulting firms were putting out their predictions of the top 20 risks, I think it was only like one of the top 20 companies even had pandemic risk in their reports.
Yeah.
And, it was only 3-4 months later that the world basically shut down. So that was kind of a scary wake up call. And these are smart people studying all these trends that, didn't really see it coming.
Yeah.
I think to your point, though, what it will do, and it certainly did for us, was helped us sharpen our pencil a bit more on how do we prepare for different scenarios and shocks in ways that we can make our solutions as resilient as possible for clients.
Yeah.
And in the end, that's why people buy insurance, is for protection. So I think in the end, we're all going to be better for having had to strengthen things as a result.
Yeah. Sometimes we need to go through something to learn how to get through it in the future. I'm really curious with all the use of digital tools and digital interactions, and making up for the lack of the ability to do things as in person as we have before, and the adoption rates going up. Are you seeing that impact the relationship between clients and various kinds of advisors that Allianz works through? Is it changing the nature of that core distribution path that you seek?
Yeah, so I think a couple things are coming together that are making that interesting. So we actually are seeing that clients and advisors are reporting that if they had relationships with advisors, prior to the pandemic, and they've maybe modified the way they work with their advisors, maybe they're doing some meetings virtually, or they're doing some things electronically or digitally they hadn't done before, it's giving them more time as they're meeting together and having those conversations to talk in more depth about the more meaty issues. So they don't have to spend as much time on all the administrative details or looking at kind of simple statements. Pulling information now is really, really easy. And the administrative piece then doesn't have to consume so much of that really valuable time that clients want to spend with their advisors, really seeking advice on the tougher issues. I would also say, we're seeing, and this was happening before the pandemic, but we are seeing a large generation of financial advisors reach retirement age or getting very close to retirement age. And then we're also seeing, the generation of pre-retirees as a group of people that have a much higher comfort level utilizing some level of digital solutions in their work more generally. So I think some of the changes that happen are actually going to make the financial planning process more appealing for, that younger generation of people who are starting to think about planning for their financial future, and hopefully make the process in general more accessible so that it can be tailored to people based on their needs and preferences.
Yeah. It's a relationship with a different kind of customer. It's not necessarily that the relationship fell apart or is hampered now. It's
That's
navigating
right.
and maybe you access people who you wouldn't have otherwise.
Yeah, that's right. The other two things that we found with some research that we did as a carrier that was interesting. One was that 50% of clients surveyed said that they would still prefer to do their regular financial planning checkup meetings virtually with their advisors because, they already have a relationship and they found it to be more efficient. So
Yeah.
instead of waiting for a month to get an appointment, you can quickly hop on a call, and people like the convenience of that.
Yeah.
We also found that more women were seeking and getting access to financial advice by having more flexibility with when and how to do that. So that's a great thing because in many instances, women have been underserved in the financial advice kind of spectrum. So the more people that can get access to advice they need is obviously something we see as a big win.
Yeah, I never thought about the equity side of it, but there's definitely, I mean, you can see where all kinds of people in lots of different situations who need more of that flexibility. Suddenly things are an option for them.
For sure.
Yeah. What about your own people? So the other side of the relationship of sort of the Allianz folks to the advisors, and have you had to change the interaction internally to your distribution points and the ways that, or maybe that was more digitized before?
Yeah, no, we've definitely had to make some changes. I think, first of all, our employees who interact with financial advisors and clients had to really kind of up their knowledge base very, very quickly on how to utilize these digital tools and also how to communicate with advisors and customers about how to use them. So we had to invest pretty extensively in some training and, some upskilling to help us be really strong there. And in the end, I think that did sort of change the nature of the work. The good news is, if you think about traditional wholesaling activities where you have an individual going to meet one-on-one with either a distribution firm or an advisor, that's happening much more in a hybrid manner now too. Certainly there's still in-person meetings, but just like what we see in other aspects of the workplace, people are really thinking about, more intentionally when to be in person. And then when can they utilize more digital communication means to handle things? And I think it speeds up the process. I think, again, customizes to people's preferences. And overall, that's been a really good transition for our business.
Yeah. Having done the sales side, 2 brokers, and then at an insurtech, it's a lot. I mean, being on the road constantly, and if you could be more efficient, and if from the relationship standpoint, you're saying that people are more accepting of a digital or a hybrid interaction, you become so much more productive. You can help more people. You can be more responsive versus like, I'm on the road and I can't answer your email for the next 8 hours. That's
right.
not helping anyone for
exactly.
the visits you get in today. We've talked so much about the past and there's a lot to learn from it. You hinted at the future and sort of, what we've learned and how that set us up to think about potential future situations. But looking ahead for the life insurance space and the annuity space, what are some of the changes that you think are coming to the life insurance space, or things that are starting to develop sort of for the next 5 years, or whatever the horizon looks like, that you think would be a change for the industry?
Yeah, well, I think it's a fair point that P&C companies are a little bit, well, probably a lot further ahead. I do think the life and annuity business will continue to learn a lot from the P&C industry as they have in the past. But a few things that I think will be interesting. So I talked about how financial planning has changed and become more holistic. I do think we're going to continue to see that trend evolve, particularly now that things have been digitized, or they can be more digitally enabled with more customizable solutions that can be a little bit more plug and play for customers based on their own situations. And that will include utilizing data that wasn't historically so easily available to help either facilitate underwriting decisions or other types of in-force activities that could happen. The health data is a perfect example of that, where, if you can utilize things like wearables or other technology to better understand people's behaviors, there's no reason that you can't tailor product coverage or product pricing or things like that to be more relevant for an individual customer. And I think that will be something that we see develop. related to that, I think the connection between health and wealth is certainly becoming stronger.
Yeah.
It has been the case for a long time. The pandemic has kind of amplified that. And unfortunately, if you look at kind of, what's happened coming on the backside of the pandemic, those with, tougher health positions have suffered much more financially. So figuring out how to bring together health management and wealth management into a more holistic picture is going to be really important for a large group of Americans who have to balance out, hopefully a long longevity in retirement, but the need to keep those expenditures in check. And, inflation is only going to exacerbate that. The other piece I'm excited about is with Fintech. So we've seen what I would say a lot of different innovations tackling some niche pieces of the process, but we haven't yet seen Fintech fully reimagine the process of insurance, either new business or things that happen on the servicing side. And I do believe that we're starting to see some early threads of that with, there's some companies that are trying to tackle multiple pieces of the value chain. And I think carriers are ultimately going to have to figure out how to put these things together in a way that is more customer designed for customer facing outcomes. So those are a few things we're looking at that I think will definitely affect the way in which insurance is delivered and how customers experience it going forward.
Yeah, I think the sort of point solution approach is it's common. I mean, it's PNC as well. And there are a number of places where we're sort of waiting for the more holistic, complete picture. And it has been left up to the carriers to have to piece these things together and smooth it over. I do think that that's definitely a place where we're ripe for a true kind of revolutionary solution. Be incredibly valuable to have that. The health and wealth thing is really interesting. I'm curious if you think is that the coming together of health insurance and life insurance, or you're thinking of it differently? It's not the insurance products, it's how things are managed holistically, the data between them more sharing. Is that sort of how you see it? Or is it sort of like an acquisition story?
Yeah, I mean, the two industries are very different, right? Healthcare delivery and wealth management. So I don't think it will be in our careers that we see these things kind of merge into one. But I do think that there's more awareness on the part of consumers and advisors that managing health outcomes has a huge bearing on financial health and wealth planning. And because of the long nature of retirement planning and the various scenarios that has to be able to weather along the way, I think there's more connections that are possible that utilize data in those two fields to help customers do a better job of managing good outcomes on both sides. So I think it's going to be more about how do we use data more efficiently, more proactively? How do customers think about health and wealth together in terms of, if I'm making good decisions about managing my health, that is going to impact my financial position down the road and kind of the lifestyle that I get to lead in retirement? Those are early decisions and they require earlier interventions and earlier communications. And I don't think the products will entirely converge, but I think we're going to see more opportunities where there's riders or other types of buy-up coverages that will be possible, particularly to reward customers who do demonstrate better health management activities and better health outcomes.
Yeah, I completely agree. Even though it's not my core space, I think this is fascinating. I could keep you here for hours, but I'm going to respect your time. Thank you so much for your time today and for the thoughts. And there's a lot we can learn from each other and from lots of other industries. Jasmine, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Brian. Have a great day.
Thank you to Jasmine for joining me for the episode. I think it is really interesting when you look at the changes in the tools and the interaction methods on the financial professional side and their work with their client. What does that mean for the relationship? And, it's an interesting one that it's a new dynamic. And we sometimes tend to only focus on the tools themselves and the methodologies themselves and how we need to support that. And there's important work in that piece of the puzzle, but recognize it's a human relationship, very deep relationship in many cases. How's that changed or affected by using different tools and different ways of interacting? And that's why I asked about the Allianz to financial professional side as well, because that's another longstanding relationship, having run a distribution team, I know like those are people you go out and visit for years and years, and you build a relationship and you share meals together and get to know each other. And now you're doing things at a distance. Is it different? How do you navigate that? What does that mean? And it's an interesting point she brings up, that yes, it's different, and maybe it opens up a whole new generation or working style for people who maybe prefer to do things that way, and it's more natural for them. And so it's not just a loss, maybe it's opening up something new. So interesting perspectives. I'm fascinated to hear about the things going on in the life insurance world. It's not just because they lack the physical thing that got harmed. We've got certainly plenty of non-tangible losses in the P&C world. One of the big differences between P&C is the time scale of those policies. Remember, P&C, generally, we're talking about an annual policy. So the way you're going to interact, the things you have to consider are vastly different in that kind of context than they are in a 30, 40 or more year relationship like you might see on the life and annuity side. So, life, P&C, like we talked about, is one versus the other, or look at what's going on here and not there. But the reality is, just because they're insurance, it doesn't mean the basis of what they need to think about is the same. It's quite different. So, being more playful about P&C versus life, but the reality is they're very different spaces. Just like Jasmine said, life and health are very different spaces, even though they fall into the same half of the insurance pie. When we look at P&C versus life, it's L&H, life and health. So definitely there's lots of differences despite what we might get grouped together or along with. Really glad Jasmine was able to share some of her time today. So thank you to her and to the team at Allianz Life. They did a fantastic job making this happen. Thank you to all of you for tuning in. I hope this is valuable, regardless of whether you're a P&C person, a life person, a health person, not an insurance person, whatever. There's so much value in listening to people who are experiencing the changes, living them, pushing things forward firsthand, getting that different perspective, or maybe it's another person within the same perspective and situation that you're in. There's value in it. So engaging in shows like this, I hope you find as much value in it as I do, because I listen to lots of different shows and watch different interviews with different people from different backgrounds. And I think there's a ton to be learned as we do that. So thank you to all of you for tuning in, and I will see you next time.